Welcome to you. It is September 7th, 2011, and this is the Boscillator Watch List webinar. For those of you wondering if you could get some help with the installation of the Boscillator, we were just talking about this a moment ago. You scroll down on the home page of the Boscillator forum website area, you'll see the Boscillator lessons, learn the Boscillator here, and then setting up your charts. I posted an alternate MT4 Boscillator indicator 3 days ago for those of you having trouble installing the standard version. It appears that the alternate version worked on your charts, but it slowed your charts down. You know, wouldn't that be the brilliant thing to happen? Here's what I'm asking you to do. I have re-uploaded the original Boscillator MetaTrader onto the website. It's called Rob's Boscillator Screen Indicator.ex4. I would encourage you, if your charts are slow, to try that version. If your charts are slow even with that version, then I encourage you to let us know inside the forum, and we're going to work on that. I'm not exactly sure what's going on. If it's the original version, that shouldn't slow your computer down. But the second version, the alternate version, for those of you who had problems with the first version, that alternate version will possibly slow down your computer. And if it is, take it off your computer, take it off your charts, re-download the original file, and give it a shot. If you'd like to join us for live chatting during the course of this watchlist webinar, come to piptoring.com/forum and join us inside the chat room on the home page of the forum. You got to log in for that. It's not available to people who just stumble across the website. In fact, they can watch the chatting, but they can't contribute, Scott. It's like, oh, I got to have that.
Just out of their reach. How sad.
Just out of their reach is right. Scott, I have a live working version of the Boscillator radar screen running inside the forum right now. This is a test run to see what you all think about it, and some great comments are coming in. If you'd like to take a look at it, I'll post the link to it right on the chat room inside of the forum. Let me do that right now. And I'll post it inside the webinar software. Take a look at that. Scott, this runs through a web browser. It's embedded directly into the forum, which I think is ridiculously awesome. And it shows the 1 minute, 5 minute, and 60-minute chart, and will soon be followed by additional 15-minute and 240-minute time frames.
I think for Boscillator trading, radar screens are extremely essential. It's so easy and it lets you stay organized. I think this is an awesome feature. I'm very excited about it.
So I've sorted the Boscillator radar screen by time frame first, and then I'm sorting it by the currency pair with the highest reading on the Boscillator. As you can see, there are no 1 minute charts here this morning, Scott, that are reaching anything greater than 81. Yesterday, I had a version of the radar screen up that was malfunctioning, but this version is working perfectly.
And so just to be clear, the Bos reading is how long it's been away?
Yes.
The band's reading is the space?
Yes. And what we're doing here, for instance, is preparing a new version of this that will show every currency pair and then list time frames across the top and show them all at once for every time frame all in one space. And we'll remove this bands and bands percentage and Bos percentage and the time. We'll be removing that so it's not confusing.
Yeah, this is fantastic. I'm really excited about this.
For those of you that are religious individuals, the Aussie New Zealand has reached the sign of the beast, 666. That's got to mean something. That currency pair is satanic. That's actually not an inaccurate phenomenon. But what I'd like to do, Scott, if you don't mind, I'd like to look at the 5 minute pound yen because it's reached a reading of 236. So I'm going to go to the 5 minute chart here, and I'm going to switch to the pound yen. And for those of you that are interested in trend trading, having reached a reading of 200 on the Boscillator, we're ready to start thinking about trades. And so what I did this morning was I scaled down the size of my charts, and I drew a fib retracement from the highest candle that it reached the last time it was at the 800 to the lowest candle reached in the midst of this movement down below the 800. And then I looked at this currency pair's movement outside of and into the trifecta or Fibbles range. And Scott, what I do here is I usually draw a colored box around that entry zone. And what happened this morning, Scott, is several times the currency pair jumped up above the 23 and came back down below it. And any of those instances where it went above and came back down below it, any of these instances right here, or right here, all of these would be possible trade entries for the pound yen. And a stop loss fairly clearly would go right above the candles right here, these recent highs right here in the 123.74 range. A target on these trades starts at the zero line, the very bottom at 123.05. And we'll be seeing very soon whether or not this reverses and goes back up toward the stop loss. The great thing about this, and I don't think anybody caught this trade yet, but the more you watch, the more you learn, the more we converse, the more we do this watch list, the more you'll see. The moment that this currency pair, Scott, got halfway the distance to the zero line, we could move our stop loss to the entry price. And that created a move to break even number, and now it's a risk-free trade. And if you missed it, that's perfectly fine. We're going to look at one more of these examples in just a moment. And Scott, this is just an example of a trifecta trade. It enters into the 23% entry zone, then comes right back out of it to enter the trade. And the target is, at least initially, the zero line retracement.
With a move to break even at about 1 to 1. Is that what you said?
Yeah, with a move to break even at about 1 to 1. That's exactly right.
Makes sense.
For those of you wondering why I looked at the pound yen this morning, it was because I used the handy radar screen. Someone asked here, how is this built? There's a team of developers in Asia who have been working on this for quite some time. It's not easy to build a radar screen that can be accessed by hundreds of people simultaneously and show all of this information minute to minute. It's not a simple process. And we will make this available during this week and probably part of next week on a trial basis as we work out the kinks and add features that you have asked us for. And then we will offer it on a subscription basis. It will not be expensive, I can promise that. I mean, compared to what you're going to get out of it, nobody's trying to get rich off of you or anything like that. We just want to help you plan the trades. But you got to pay the people who built it. I didn't build this myself, by the way, Scott. I'm not smart enough to do that.
It's pretty cool. I would take credit for it if you could.
The Euro Aussie has reached a number of 205 on the Bosslater radar screen, and this is so gorgeous looking right now. I just think this is so awesome. This one is a currency pair that many of you probably have never considered trading before. A recent high when the currency pair was at the 800 last can be placed in the area that you're seeing on the screen in front of you right now. It just reached a reading of 200 on the Bosslater, just this morning. And it is just now, Scott, falling below the 23% retracement level. Just now. The entry candle is right now. It just came. It just came. Woo! It's here. And the stop loss on this would go above these recent highs at 32.74, an entry at 32.38. So that's approximately, Scott, a 40 pip stop loss. And a target in the 3200 even area, which is a 40 pip target. Unfortunately, that's not a good enough risk to reward ratio to take this trade. And so we pass. Scott, you've heard me say this so often that you're probably tired of hearing me say it. We just don't have a good risk to reward ratio on this trade, and so we're just going to let it go.
But if it pops back up and then comes back down, we could probably get it later.
Right. That's just exactly right. And we can't draw the fib retracement back any farther because we need to use the candles that were the high point of the candles that were in the sideways movement along the 800 period simple moving average. So there's nothing really that we can do here right now in this pair. So we're just going to let it pass. But Scott said if it rises up higher up here again above the 38 and comes back down below the 33, then we could have a 60 pip profit target potentially. and like a 20 pip stop loss, and that would be just fantastic.
Yes.
Let's see if any questions, comments, or jokes came through. All right, none did. Scott, do you have a stock that you want to look at or not?
Well, I've got a ton of details on the stocks we talked about yesterday, and it's up to you on how detailed you want me to get in. I can just talk about what's happened most recently. But yeah, I've got updates based on what we talked about yesterday and the day before.
Yeah, why don't we go ahead and do that? I'm going to switch the presentation over to you, and then if you don't mind, what we'll do here is we'll just look at one from start to finish on the, just like you said, on the overview, and then I will re-communicate whatever you say so everyone will hear it twice, and then on the recording it will be completely audible for those people watching a little bit later on.
All right, well then I wanted to bring up an edge. We've been talking about that for a few days. Over to the left is some entries and exits that we could have taken from the very beginning. We'll just talk about it from the point that we mentioned it yesterday. Is that all right?
Yes.
As you can see in my little text, we talked yesterday about it here. It was right around 12 o'clock my time, Eastern Standard. And we mentioned it, and at that time, the stochastic was dropping, and it had not come back up yet. Not too long thereafter, 4 minutes, 4 minutes after 12, you got a cross above fairly at this point. You could have entered right here. At that point, you put a stop below the recent lows, or you can even go back further. But you could have done a tight stop on it, and we've made tons and tons and tons. Now, one thing I wanted to talk about.
Well, let me stop you there, and I'll repeat what you said. Scott mentions that yesterday we spoke about this stock, Ahmed, and that it had reached a reading on the Bosslater that made it reasonable to begin the process of counter-trend trading. We talked about a stochastic crossover that needed to occur before that point in time. That stochastic crossover occurred at approximately noon or 12:04. Just minutes later, it started to move up. Minutes later, after noon even, it went up, and there was plenty available in here to do two things. One, to get the stop loss at break even at a minimum, or two, to even take some profit on a stock like this. Now, you may be trading currencies, which is fine. We use these examples from the stock market to just reaffirm that the principles that we're speaking about are not just applicable to one type of financial instrument. Scott, you have something else that you'd like to mention here as well.
Well, two quick things. The first thing is you absolutely positively take it up all the way up to 800.
Right, let me re-communicate what Scott just said because it's good information. If you had a really tight stop on that trade, there's a black line running through the bottom of the candles there. If your stop loss was right there, it's just mere pennies away from where you got in the first place. And even if you put it double the distance down, yesterday's movement upward was more than enough to provide a 2-to-1 and up to a 5-to-1 profit on this trade, and it hadn't even reached the 800 yet. And Scott said, it is totally reasonable in a time like that to just go ahead and take all of the profit off. I mean, part of it and then move the rest to break even or whatever, but we would consider this a successful trade even before the moment at which it reached the 800 because it had reached, optimal reward to risk ratios. But that's not all. If you missed the entry the first time around, Scott, it looks like it did produce an additional entry a little bit later on in the day. All right, to repeat what Scott said, if you missed the first entry or it had not reached a number of bossylated bars or candles, you could wait until later on in the day. And what we have at that later time in the day is the stock falls below the 200-period simple moving average and then rises back above it. That's the green line running through the middle of Scott's screen. It simultaneously was also producing a bullish stochastic crossover, which is another one of our entry methods on the Bosslater trade. Once again, you get a tight stop. I mean, we're putting our stops in these instances almost directly below the recent movement. We don't want to stay in these trades if things go wrong. Of course, you got to watch out for the spread. So if you have a wide spread on your stock or financial instrument, you can't put your stop loss inside of the spread unless you're magic. But even if you had to move it farther back, like we've talked about, the difference between the movement in your favor versus what you risked in the first place to take this trade is incredible. And that's the power in this methodology isn't that I dreamed up some magic number or came up with some fancy name or whatever else. What you paid to learn how to do, in my opinion, is you paid to learn how to come here and see trades that had a fantastic reward to risk ratio. And that's what Scott's showing you on a stock right now. And I don't know why we don't have 10,000 retail stock traders banging down the doors right now to buy this course. And the reason is we don't know any stock traders, but that's perfectly fine. But what Scott mentions is it zooms right up to the 800 period simple moving average. The difference between the profit target and the stop loss in this case is incredible. There is a significant difference between those two numbers. You're risking something like 5 cents or 10 cents in order to gain something like 50 or 60 or whatever. And of course there's always a spread, and of course there are transaction costs. There's other kinds of things involved. But even after paying transaction costs, and even after paying your Aunt Betty for the use of her computer with E-Trade installed, even after all of that, it's still, Scott, a fantastically profitable trade because you got a 1483 entry and a 1560 exit or something like that. I mean, it's incredible.
Yeah, it was better. And I outlined a few entries, all based on stochastic here. There's a 1483 entrance from number 6. Late number 6. So if you had entered back here, you never would have been troubled. The enter at 1483, stop goes below there, right? I'm going to get rid of that. 1483 entrance would not have been crazy.
All right. So for those of you listening on the recording, we've just spent some time going over Ahmed, and I've translated some of Scott's work onto the recording so you could hear it. There are brief periods of time where you probably don't hear anything at all and you wonder what's happening. We appreciate you joining us for this recorded version of the Watchlist webinar for Wednesday, September 7th, 2011.